Howdy doody everybody, and welcome back to my journey across the United States. Today we're diving into New Hampshire's haunted hotspots, just in time for Halloween. Think eerie haunted horses in stables, spooky restaurants, and forgotten mental hospitals. Make sure to watch the whole thing so you don't miss a ghost story near you. Also, quickly, I want to thank my amazing channel members, Patricia Hall Westmolder, Barbie, and Jimmy Duncan. Also, thanks to NordVPN for the affiliate support. Now, don't you dare spend money on my behalf, but if you're into secure browsing and you're looking for a VPN service anyways, check out the links below and it'll support me too. And hey, if you're enjoying our journey through the USA, please hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. This will never cost you a dime. With that being said, let's dive into New Hampshire's ghost stories. Alright, so let's dive into the tale of Mary Wilson Wallace, or as she's more famously known, Ocean-born Mary. Mary was a real woman, born in July of 1720 on a ship crossing the Atlantic Ocean to America. Her parents, James and Elizabeth Wilson, were just minding their business when, as the legend goes, the ship was suddenly raided by pirates. And here's where it gets interesting. These pirates apparently had a soft spot for newborn children, so instead of plundering the ship, they took a look at the baby and felt some sort of pirate compassion. And they offered the ship that they would leave peacefully, on one condition: that the child be named after one of them. You know, because pirates notoriously love leaving legacies. As a parting gift, they even gave the family a green silk wedding gown. For Mary, of course. Because hey, if you're raiding a ship, why not help a baby plan ahead for their wedding day? Now let's fast forward a bit. Mary ended up growing up in Londonderry, New Hampshire, and she was a striking 6-foot-tall redhead with glowing green eyes. She ended up marrying one James Wallace, and she lived a peaceful life. She had 4 sons, and after her husband passed away, she moved in with her son William. She lived to the ripe old age of 94, and she passed away in 1814, and she was buried in Henniker, New Hampshire. As for that pirate wedding gown, pieces of it are now scattered across museums in New Hampshire. And here's where things get funny. In the 1930s, a couple named Louis and Flora Ray bought Robert Wallace's old home. That's Mary's son's house, the place that, she never actually lived because she lived with her son William. Regardless, the Rays weren't going to let facts get in the way of a good ghost story, so they filled the place with random trinkets, claiming they belonged to Ocean-born Mary, and they started spinning tales. According to them, the pirate who gave Mary the wedding dress actually came back to visit her in her old age, and he buried this treasure on the property, as well as starting a love affair with her, and this treasure was left behind for anyone brave enough to dig it up. That is, if they could get past the ghost of Ocean-born Mary, of course. As the story goes, Mary fiercely defended this pirate treasure, but met a tragic end in the process, and now she haunts the land, scaring off any treasure hunters who dare come looking for the pirate's gold. And naturally, as the Rays told these tales, they also sold shovels to anyone willing to give undigging this treasure a try. At least you gotta applaud them for their entrepreneurial spirit. But perhaps the spookiest part of this legend comes from a more modern-day encounter. As the story goes, some lost travelers once stopped at the house to ask for directions, and they were greeted at the door by a tall, red-haired woman dressed in colonial garb, who said nothing. She just kind of stood there, silently. Was this Ocean-born Mary? Who knows, but it's enough to make you think twice about knocking on a stranger's door if they live in Robert's old house. Next up, let me take you to Durham, New Hampshire, where a historic property reflects over 3 centuries of cultural and commercial evolution. This property, which is now the 3 Chimneys Inn, was originally owned by Valentine Hill back in the 17th century and featured a sawmill and farmland. The homestead, built in 1649, has seen quite a bit, surviving attacks by Native Americans, being used for Revolutionary War munitions storage, and going through multiple owners, including the Woodman family in the 1700s and one George Frost II in the 1800s. Frost gave the place a makeover while he was the owner, updating it with Federal-style renovations that helped keep it commercially successful, at least until the area fell out of the limelight. Fast forward to the early 1900s, and James and Margaret Sawyer transformed the estate into a colonial revival-style summer residence, complete with formal gardens and recreational spaces. But like many old estates, it also eventually fell into disrepair, until Sagamore Hill Incorporated took over in 1987, restoring it to its former glory by 1997. Today, the building stands as the Three Chimneys Inn, along with an associated tavern where visitors can soak up the rich history and maybe even encounter a few lingering spirits. Speaking of spirits, the most famous ghost said to haunt the inn is a descendant of Valentine Hill. Her name's Hannah. Now, Hannah is not your typical brooding ghost. She has a bit of a mischievous streak. She likes messing with electronics and enjoys hiding visitors' belongings. Honestly, she might be haunting my house too, because I'm always losing my keys and my wallet and my phone and my watch, and I could go on. But Hannah's pranks don't stop there. I'm not sure how she does it, but apparently she not only unplugs printers, but makes them still print while unplugged. Pretty spooky stuff. Overnight staff, they're also woken up by a mysterious woman playing with their hair. Maybe just a strange attempt at affection? She's also been heard walking around in the inn's offices, opening cabinets, and even unlocking deadbolts like it's no big deal to just let strangers inside. Guests also have their own creepy stories too. For instance, one group from a local insurance company reported dining in the maple room during the holidays when a wine glass decided to lift itself off the table and hurl itself into the wall. I guess hopefully it was white wine, because red wine is pretty much impossible to clean up, but I digress. And it doesn't end there either. Hannah's face and her shadowy figure have been spotted in mirrors, lurking behind guests, and even captured in photographs. So if you're ever on a visit here, keep an eye on those mirrors. You never know who or what might be looking back. Near the White Mountains National Forest, in the kind of funny named Hart's Location, New Hampshire, that's the name of the city, Hart's Location, there's an 1860s mansion that's beautiful and clad in granite. It rests on a knoll at the base of Mount Binnis, looking upon Mount Hope and Crawford. This inn has been in operation since the 1920s, and on this property in the 18th century, there was a home referred to as the Mount Crawford House, which stood on the property, and part of which is the modern-day dining room and tavern for the Notchland Inn. Crawford Notch is actually named for this individual, Abel Crawford, who owned the original home. This location has 8,000 feet of Saco River frontage on the property and great swimming holes, as well as nearby hiking trails that attract tourists throughout the year. And it also has a heck of a ghost story attributed to it that is both fascinating, sad, and historically relevant simultaneously. Now, if you visit this inn, you'll find something odd in the front parlor. There's actually a headstone in it that says, 1778, Nancy Barden died in a snowstorm in pursuit of her faithless lover, during the time period of the Revolutionary War. Nearby, there are also features that are eerily named Nancy Pond, Nancy Mountain, and Nancy Brook, which you would correctly assume are also named after this woman, Nancy Barton. At the time of this story, Nancy herself was just 16, working as a service girl for a farmer, Colonel Joseph Whipple, in Jefferson, New Hampshire, with another individual who she would develop feelings for, one Jim Swindle. I don't know if his last name being Swindle is kind of a joke or if it's actually real, because he sure swindled her. Now, as I said, she fell for this Jim, who was a farmhand, and they planned to move together to Portsmouth. And, as was traditional at the time, Nancy gave Jim her life savings as a dowry. According to the story, though, Whipple, a pro-colonial army individual, convinced Jim to leave and join the colonist fight against the British in the Revolutionary War. And he apparently was easily swayed, as he actually took Nancy's money, and him and Whipple left to go join up with the colonist army. Of course, it didn't take Nancy long to take in what was happening, and she was not dismayed, setting off after Jim on foot and ignoring the pleas of others to just let him go. She left into the New Hampshire winter without hardly any supplies or proper clothing. This day, she hiked for 20 miles before finding the remnants of a fire, which she assumed belonged to her lover and the colonel, and she stopped to rest, feeling cold and hungry, before pressing on into the cold. And eventually, finding herself soaked, freezing, and unable to go on, she stopped by a brook, that is the modern-day Nancy Brook, and was found later by a search party. She was sitting on a rock by the water, frozen. Nancy was buried around where she was found, and the region is now known as the Nancy Brook Scenic Area to commemorate her passing. Now, of course, Nancy didn't entirely leave the property if you believe the stories. Apparently these days, she's still there, and she likes to play pranks on the locals that attend the building built over her gravestone. Some couples have reported that when they get out of the shower and expect to find a normal steamed-over mirror, they've seen the name Abigail written on the mirror instead, in steam, despite being alone in the room. Now, I'm not sure who Abigail is, but I'm assuming Nancy wrote this. Others have even claimed to see this phenomenon despite the fact that the bathroom hadn't been used in hours. Another account tells a tale where on a couple's anniversary, fresh flowers were found in the bedroom, with Happy Anniversary written on the room's mirror in lipstick. Now obviously this was unplanned by the husband who found it, and he thought it was a little confusing and maybe a little bit scary, so he left the room to consult his wife about it, who was in the lobby, only to return and find the lipstick and flowers were gone afterwards. Creepy. Additionally, hikers in the area have reported not only crying by the brook and on the nearby trails, but also shrieks of laughter, as if coming from someone displaying mania in the woods. The Tilton Inn, built in 1875, has quite the story to tell. Over its long history, it's hosted big names like Thomas Edison and Henry Ford, and today it's known as the Tilton Inn and Onions Pub. But it's not just famous for its high-profile guests. Throughout its 100-plus years, the inn has survived 3 fires, and it's actually one of those fires that sparked the haunting tale we're diving into today. The story centers around a young girl named Laura who was tragically caught in one of these fires. This occurred in the 1800s when she was only 12 years old and she was staying with her family in what is now called the Sanborn Room. But Laura, even though her body was destroyed, she never really left. Now, if you're into the medium scene, they say that Laura's spirit is quite eager to communicate. She's often seen carrying a spectral stuffed animal, because even ghosts have their comfort items, I suppose, and those who have encountered her describe her wearing a tan one-piece jumper with blue paisley design, and her hair is always neatly combed. As for her ghostly antics, well, Laura likes to get around. She's been spotted upstairs in the guest rooms and downstairs in the Onions Pub, where she's known for knocking things off of shelves and rattling guest dishes. Typical ghost behavior, right? Some guests have even woken up in the middle of the night to the sounds of furniture being moved around, only to catch a glimpse of a little girl in the corner of the room, slowly fading away, and some say even smiling. So, next time you're finding yourself at the Tilton Inn, keep an eye and maybe an ear out for little Laura. She's friendly, but she definitely likes to make her presence known, it sounds. In 1902, a rich coal broker and entrepreneur, Joseph Stickney, living in Pennsylvania, who was from Concord, New Hampshire, built an opulent hotel that in today's money would cost nearly $100 million to construct. This hotel was graced with only the finest of details, with Stickney contracting 250 Italian artists to build the hotel and perfect its granite and stucco masonry. At this hotel's opening, Joseph Stickney and his wife Carolyn, who was 27 years younger than him, and who he'd met and married just 10 years prior, looked upon the crowd, and Joseph stated, "Look at me, gentlemen, for I am the poor fool who built all of this." An iconic quote, although he didn't get to stick around long to look at this opulent place, as within a year, at 64, he passed away from a heart attack, leaving his poor wife Carolyn to steward the hotel afterwards, spending her summers in the hotel, and thus Carolyn spent more time in this hotel than Joseph ever would. Carolyn was notable for her eccentricities. It's said that a few years down the line, when she married a French prince, she would only sleep in her own bed, transporting the bed back and forth between France and the Mount Washington Hotel. She also kept the same table for every meal in the hotel's dining hall, and slept in the same room, room 314. As you could imagine, for someone to travel back and forth between France and New England year after year to summer in this hotel, she must have had a great appreciation for the place. And it's said that for this reason, she continues to be a resident of the hotel even after she's passed away. Guests visiting the Mount Washington Hotel throughout history have reported seeing a woman dressed in Victorian clothing wandering the halls. They say that she's dressed in magnificent clothing and that sometimes she's seen in their room shortly before some of their things go missing, although it's always said that these things are returned. If you're lucky enough to be handed a key card for room 314, the room where the princess loved to spend her time, you may be in for an even more intimate experience. It's said that in this room, where her 4-poster bed is still used to this day, you might feel your bed rustle in the middle of the night, and you might wake up to see her sitting on the edge of it. This isn't just hearsay either. The hotel, to this day, pays her quite a bit of respect. In the dining hall, they still keep her old reserved table empty and set every evening, just in case the lady of the hotel wishes to dine with the guests. In addition to this unusually graceful ghost story, it's said that lights are known to flicker on and off throughout the hotel, and sometimes babies, for whatever reason, can be heard crying in the hotel, especially in the ballroom. Admittedly, these two things feel sort of cheap in comparison to leaving a table set for a long-departed guest of the hotel, though. Today, you can still visit this hotel, now under the name of Omni Mount Washington Hotel. It's heralded as one of the last surviving grand hotels to exist in the White Mountains. Now, I've heard varying opinions on this place, but my personal opinion is that if you're in the White Mountains, you've got to take a trip to Conway, New Hampshire. And while you're there, you might as well drive down Stark Road. Now, as you drive along on this road, you'll come to a small, weathered cemetery. It's kind of tucked between trees and bushes, and it's really frankly easy to miss. At first glance, it really doesn't look like much. Many of the tombstones are cracked, it's a little bit overgrown, and it's sort of rough around the edges. Some might even assume it had been forgotten, especially considered this cemetery was damaged by the local Department of Public Works in the 80s during a road resurfacing. Now, don't be fooled by appearances though. This place has a reputation, not just a haunted one, a historical one too. And as the legend goes, if you drive by this spot at night, you'll not only notice that it draws in ghost hunters and curious visitors, but also it draws in a pair of red, glowing eyes. According to witnesses, these ominous eyes lurk inside of the cemetery, and if you drive by at night, they might just follow you, glaring back at you through your rearview mirror, just in case you need a little bit of motivation to speed up, I guess. And while these red, glowing eyes are creepy and all, they don't exactly tell us much about who or what is haunting this place. So if we want a little more substance to this tale, we have to dig a little bit deeper into the history of this graveyard. Now, one of the most intriguing tombstones here is for General John Stark, the New Hampshire hero who's famous for the state's motto, "Live free or die," which, let's be real, makes for a really cool license plate. But there is a twist on this tale, I should tell you. John Stark is actually buried in Manchester in Stark Park. It's pretty well accepted. So, with this in mind, who or what is under that tombstone in this cemetery? Certainly not John. That's a mystery in itself. So maybe for whatever reason, whatever's buried under that gravestone is the red-eyed beast or whatever it is. Some people also believe the red-eyed specter might belong to William Stark, another family member whose burial location actually remains unknown. Maybe those eyes glow red with jealousy and rage because his body was lost and not laid to rest next to the rest of his family. Some speculate for this reason he wanders the graveyard in frustration or as a protector of his kin. Another theory points to a darker chapter of history. During the 1700s, a smallpox outbreak swept through Conway, and the Stark House, located near this cemetery, was actually used to quarantine those infected and kind of just give them a place to die, to be honest. The unfortunate souls who succumbed to the illness were buried here in the Stark Cemetery, or at least some of them, it's said. Now, I don't know if this is entirely true. I couldn't find any documentation of this, but folks say some of the people that died of smallpox were buried here. Some speculate that the red eyes belong to one of these victims, haunted by the cruel and unfair treatment they received during their final days, being locked away in a house that wasn't even theirs, now roaming the cemetery in an eternal unrest. So whether it's William's lost soul, a restless smallpox victim, or whatever lurks under John Stark's tombstone, one thing's for sure: if you're passing by Stark Road at night, keep an eye in your rearview mirror. You might not be driving alone. Alright, so this cemetery is just pure urban legend goodness. In Pine Hill Cemetery in Hollis, New Hampshire, there is a cemetery that's rumored to be haunted as all get out. The cemetery's land was originally donated by Benjamin Parker Jr. in 1769 because he was selling his farm and the local people were demanding a cemetery because at the time there was no centralized spot to bury the local dead. One of the individuals that ended up buried here is an individual who's buried in 1867 named Abel Blood, who, as you probably guessed it, is the reason that this cemetery has the nickname Blood Cemetery. It's not actually named Blood Cemetery. And on his gravestone, there was imagery of a finger that was pointing up towards the heavens. How nice. That is, unless you believe the urban legends. Now, not to slander ghost hunters in general, there are some factual ones out there who look for spooky skeletons and are honest about the lack of them that seem to exist. But many ghost hunters claim that they could have sworn that when they visited this gravesite at night, the one that points up towards the day during the day, at night the finger was actually pointed down, towards the ground. Now you'll notice I'm talking in the past tense here. That's because some friggin' vandals apparently broke the tombstone. Just a side note, if you're out there breaking tombstones in graveyards, you need to get a second job or something. Look for something better to do. In addition to this urban legend, there are other reports of weird activity with cameras not taking photos, car radios not working, and full-bodied apparitions that, I guess since the finger tombstone is gone, take the cake for the predominant activity these days. Despite this, in my views, these are kind of cheap compared to the tombstone legend, so that remains the most attractive haunting in this graveyard, despite the fact that the tombstone is gone. So, the Woodland Cemetery in Keene has a spot on the grounds that's supposedly the source of its haunting. A place named Summer Night Chapel, like the night that saves princesses from dragons, not Nighttime Night. This chapel is a family memorial chapel on high land in the Woodland Cemetery, and it's a half-story structure that can actually seat about 150 people. It was made in memory of the father of one Marcus W. Knight in the 1930s, from what I can tell. Anyways, it houses the spirit, supposedly, of an individual who I presume may be Marcus W. Knight himself, but whatever lives here is certainly not a fan of cursing near its resting place, and it's known to violently take action towards individuals who screw around near here. Now, obviously, it's a well-known fact that telling someone not to do something is a sure way to make someone do something, and thus folks frequent this place to swear at the chapel and see what happens. There's actually a prominent urban legend about the spot that tells the tale of 4 young boys and a young woman who visited it. They parked near the chapel, got out of their cars, and started swearing the daylights away at this place. And suddenly 3 of them started to taste soap in their mouths, and they hated it. But the other 2, a couple, didn't, and thought that the other 3 were putting on a show for them, trying to scare them. Now this couple was dared to kiss and see if each other's tongues tasted of soap. And unable to turn down a kiss or a dare, the 2 went right at it. And wow, it was getting kind of weird. Those 2 just wouldn't stop kissing. And their friends suddenly noticed, whoa, it doesn't look like they can let go of each other, or stop kissing at all, or maybe breathe. And this is starting to get scary. And so one of the kids eventually had the good sense to apologize to the spirit of the chapel, and only then could the couple break apart. And they said they didn't actually taste soap, but rather they tasted dirt, or maybe ashes, and that it felt kind of like hard, bony hands were holding them together. Additionally, this cemetery is known to be home to a young girl's ghost who wanders the cemetery, peeking at visitors from behind trees and tombstones, as well as orbs and other random one-off full-bodied apparitions. But the star of the show has always been the ghost that guards the chapel of the cemetery and makes sure people don't swear at it. Vale End Cemetery came to be in 1772 when the town voted to fence in the old burying ground. But the oldest grave on site comes from even earlier, and it's known to be one of a lady named Phoebe Cram. The graveyard was also upgraded in the coming years, and in 1780 it got a stone wall, and it was expanded in 1869 with the donation of more land, and eventually in 1871 it got a proper name, Vale End Cemetery. It's thought that the story regarding the cemetery dates back to the 1970s, and the individual blamed in this account is one Mary Ritter Spalding, a woman who passed away at age 35 and was buried here in 1808. She was actually the second wife of one Captain Isaac Spalding, and in death she actually shares the grounds with this captain, but also his first wife, who also was named Mary Spalding apparently. Apparently in life, this woman was a mother to 7 children and a local healer who focused on curing illnesses with herbal remedies. But in death, she's a folklore figure who is known to manifest as a glowing blue woman who haunts and roams the cemetery, often rising up out of her grave and wandering the grounds. Apparently, some claim she also manifests as a blue pillar of light erupting from the ground. A well-known story about the haunting is that back in 1999, two ghost hunters, a mother and child, were ghost hunting here at Vale End, and they saw something. Not the blue lady, actually, just something menacing rise up from behind Mary's grave, scaring the ghost hunters away and leaving them sort of unsure about life. And just weeks later, the mother of this duo was actually found unresponsive in her car, having suffered a heart attack, and leading individuals who knew of her encounter to wonder if maybe something followed them home from the cemetery. The child of the duo returned a year later in 2000 and apparently reported seeing not a ghost actually, but a short, red-looking humanoid that almost looked like Elmo, if you can believe this kind of weird, crazy story. And when approaching it, she slammed into some sort of force field, and then more little red Elmo figures appeared upon her contact with the force field. Now, after this story, she apparently took a quick photo of the Elmos and ran, but of course, none of them would properly develop. Now, whether or not this tale is true, I do think it makes for a fun story, but I do find it a little bit dubious to consider, Elmos living in a graveyard, or whatever you want to call these little red critters. This next story is a little bit of a mystery, not because of the haunting itself, but because nobody seems to agree on where it actually takes place. Some sources say Eton, New Hampshire, others claim it's Epsom, New Hampshire. Honestly, I couldn't tell you for sure, but Eden seems to be the front runner, so we're going to roll with that. Eden, for those of you unfamiliar, is on the eastern side of the state, sort of near Maine, and the haunting here, well, it's not your typical human ghost story. Nope, this one's about the ghost of a horse. You heard that right, a horse. So in Oklahoma, we talked about Mr. Ed, now we're talking about a ghost horse. The story goes like this. In the area around Eden, there's said to be an abandoned farmhouse sitting atop Toll Hill. One winter, during a brutal blizzard, a horse apparently got loose from its handler and sought shelter in the farmhouse. Unfortunately, it seems that when the storm cleared out, the poor horse couldn't find its way home. By the time spring rolled around, the farmer who owned the property found the horse trapped inside, having met a sad end. He buried the horse on the land, thinking that was the end of it. But as with all good ghost stories, there was a ghost in it. But anyways, the following winter, during another snowy night, the farmer began hearing kind of weird noises coming from the farmhouse. Specifically, he heard the sounds of a horse neighing and slamming into the walls as if trying to escape. Spooked? Yeah, I would be too. Now, the farmhouse itself, if it even still exists, seems to have been lost to time. I couldn't find its exact location, and trust me, I tried. But locals on Reddit do say that the farmhouse still exists, and if you do manage to stumble upon it on the right day during the right snowstorm, you might hear the same eerie sounds, a horse's desperate neighs and thudding of hooves against the walls. In Hampton Beach, New Hampshire, a place that's generally a summertime destination from what I'm reading, there's a story about a woman named Eunice Goody Cole, who used to live on Island Path Road in Hampton. As the story goes, old Goody Cole was accused of witchcraft in the 1600s. According to locals, they thought she cursed a bunch of sailors, and these sailors passed away at sea. And honestly, I was expecting the angry mob to come for her, but apparently they actually just find her. How reasonable for the time, at least. Ultimately, she actually just passed away of natural causes, but being a witch and all, the locals decided they needed to take precautions. And apparently they dug her up post-burial and drove a stake right through her, which roused the witch from her sleep and now results in an ongoing haunting. Today, folks that drive or walk along Island Path Road in Hampton now often report seeing the foggy figure of a woman walking or perhaps even jogging down the road that essentially goes nowhere. They also report other haunted happenings, such as objects in the area moving about on the road or electronics in cars having issues, unprompted. Now, frankly, I am surprised to report that Eunice Goody Cole was actually very much a real person and is the only woman ever convicted of witchcraft in New Hampshire. During her time, she was married to one William Cole, and it doesn't look like she had any kids. They didn't seem too witchy, to be honest. They were actually servants of one Matthew Craddock, a London merchant, and they were given land in Quincy, Massachusetts, though when they were given it, they quickly left for Exeter, New Hampshire. They were even Christian, from what I can tell, which is also sort of clashing with the whole witch business. Now, the story doesn't actually get at the fact that Cole was also accused of witchcraft 2 other times in her life. Once in Boston in 1656, when townspeople testified against her and actually imprisoned her for 4 years until 1660, And then again 2 years later, when she was jailed until around 1668 or 1671. It's not entirely clear. She was finally acquitted at this time, but accused again in 1673 on grounds of vehement suspicion of her guilt, and again kept imprisoned, even though she was never indicted this time. When she passed away in 1680, she was quickly buried in Hampton in an unmarked grave, and in reality, modern individuals don't actually know where she's buried. Some think, though, that she was buried near the modern Tuck Museum. In reality, the reason why she was being accused of being a witch is speculated by historians to be that she just was kind of ugly, with Hampton historian Joseph Dow reporting that in life, she was just an ugly person with a bad temperament, so sure, she probably wasn't easy to get along with, but goodness gracious, she did not deserve the hand she was dealt in life. And I'd probably also be an angry person too if I went through this and was repeatedly thrown in jail for BS. Nowadays, the community actually has come together to clear the Cole family name and sort of apologize to her in hindsight. And in the local area, you can actually find a doll in her image being sold, apparently. Now, as someone who loves a good jog, especially in the woods, I've got to say New Hampshire is among my favorite places to run. I even ran my first marathon here. But there's a runner in New Hampshire whose favorite place to jog is along River Road north of Manchester. And this runner and I, well, we don't have much in common because I'm alive and he's not. As the story goes, this phantom jogger shows up on River Road, and it's said his favorite day of the year to go for this jog is Halloween night, between 1:45 and 2:20 in the morning. I'm not sure if that's 1 to 2 a.m. on November 1st or October 31st, but one of those at least. Apparently, this jogger's first mention was around the 1970s, and there isn't any specific incident folks point towards that caused this runner to show up. No hidden run, or anything, really, in the news. He doesn't appear to be running scared either, he just appears to be running for fitness, so it doesn't seem he was attacked or anything. Now, personally, despite being a marathoner, I'm not sure if I'd continue jogging if there was no fitness to gain from it. But hey, kudos to his passion. Now, this isn't just a legend these days. Its pervasiveness has actually led to the ghost hunter becoming sort of a pastime. Some days, particularly on Halloween, it's said that if you drive down River Road, you might see a bunch of cars parked with local kids and adults alike, parked, waiting along the road, hoping to snag a quick view of the ghost jogger. By all accounts, he looks sort of like a normal guy and doesn't pay those there to watch him any mind, but be warned, if you get in his way, he won't stop. He'll just run right through you. The Portsmouth Chase House is named for Stephen Chase and his wife Mary, who married each other in 1771 and had 6 children, with 2 of them being born in the house. They were actually the third owners of the home, as the home was originally built in 1762 by one John Underwood, who sold it to a family named the Deerings, who were ship carvers, and these individuals are actually responsible for some of the styling in the home themselves. And then the Chase family moved in 1779. Now, Stephen sounds like he sort of had it all for the time. He was a Harvard graduate, and he was a wealthy merchant and investor who purchased the beautiful home, which had everything from a dining room and entertaining rooms to a beautiful center hallway. Now, unlike some of the rich folk we cover in this series, Stephen actually had the luxury of living in his home for more than a few years before passing away, and in 1805 he passed, leaving his sons William and Theodore and his wife to run his business, and leaving them the home too. The home was eventually passed down to their children as well, and then donated to the city by Theodore's son for use as an orphanage. Now here's where the checkered past of this orphanage appears. It is documented that while this building was an orphanage, a bacterial infection, likely diphtheria, rampaged through it, and 9 of the children got it, getting fever and chills and having labored breathing, and most of them recovered all right, but one of the girls actually had it so bad she passed away. This was actually covered in the Boston Globe at the time, so this passing should be considered all but confirmed. Regardless of the tragedy, the home actually continued to grow in number, and by 1916, the place was actually so strapped for room that they moved to Middle Road in Portsmouth into a larger location in a new building. Now, I can't tell whether it was at this or the prior location, which might be credence to this new rumor being false, but there are also claims that at one of these locations, a young woman took her own life. Now, if this did occur, I and other folks covering this topic have had trouble finding any documentation of a young girl passing away by her own hands. So this second tale of a passing on the second or perhaps the first property I'd consider dubious at best. Now, you've probably gotten this already, but the most common haunting in the building, because of what has happened in the old building and the new building, which people often conflate as a single building, are sightings of a young girl in the building, usually just her apparition, that pays little mind to visitors of the home. They also report hearing screams of a young girl in the dorm. Additionally, while the third floor has been vacant for years, having previously been a place for counselors in the home, it's still frequently the site of footsteps, both running and walking above modern-day individuals. Staff in the kitchen have also described an instance where they were talking about ghosts haunting the home and the lights suddenly went off on them. These days, the home remains in the 1916 location as a treatment center and home for at-risk youth, for youth ages 11 to 18, as well as a museum that's part of the Strawberry Bank Museum, doing its best to preserve the history that this place was founded upon. In Laconia, New Hampshire, a picturesque town established in 1761, you'll find the historic Colonial Theater. This charming venue, designed by George Griffin and owned by Benjamin Piscopo, features a stunning fire curtain that showcases a view of Venice from the ocean, paying homage to Benjamin's Italian roots. The theater originally flourished with a mix of plays and motion pictures, boasting 5 movie screens, until it closed in August of 2002 after 87 years of operation. Thankfully, after a comprehensive restoration, completed in 2021, the theater has been revived and now hosts live performances, music, and civic events. Like many old theaters, the Colonial Theater is rumored to be haunted. While the spirits aren't tied to specific individuals, locals often report flickering lights and doors mysteriously opening and closing on their own. Staff members also share tales of creaking stairs echoing through empty halls, adding to the eerie atmosphere. One of the more intriguing sightings involves a shadowy figure, often seen wandering the building after hours. Let's hope it's a friendly ghost rather than an unwelcome squatter. A particularly notable apparition is also said to linger on the theater's balcony, and the ghost seems to have a fondness for acoustic guitar music, with reports suggesting that the chances of encountering him increase if a guitar is being played. It's worth noting, however, that some of these strange occurrences could stem from the building's age, including damage to its electrical system and repairs from an earlier fire that may have led to questionable construction on the site. So while the ghost tales are captivating, they may also have some practical explanations. If you find yourself in Laconia, the Colonial Theater offers a blend of history and a dash of the supernatural, perfect for an evening of entertainment with a spooky twist. Have you ever heard of the Isle of Shoals? A set of islands straddling the Maine and New Hampshire border, or at least close to it. Now, I've personally had the pleasure to go kayaking to one of these gems, Star Island. It's just 7 miles from the mainland, and it's the largest of the islands, named for its star-like shape, as imagined by early sailors. This charming locale has a rich history, dating back to the 1600s, when it served as a bustling commercial port. Mapped in 1614 by none other than Captain John Smith, the same guy from Pocahontas, Star Isle was originally settled by fishermen in the 1670s. During the Revolutionary War, it was evacuated due to fears of British sympathizers being off of the American mainland, and for years it remained sparsely populated until the mid-19th century, and since then it's been owned by the Star Island Corporation since 1915. Nowadays, it's nearly self-sufficient, boasting one of the largest off-grid solar farms in New England that provides clean energy and water, and you can hop on a ferry to reach this enchanting spot where history mingles with the supernatural. One of the island's most haunted tales centers around a fisherman and his family from the 1600s. Tragically, their young son fell while playing outside of their cottage, modern-day Cottage E, which also might be Vaughan College, I think they're the same, and visitors to this cottage report feeling small hands touch them, and being playfully pushed on the stairs, and even hearing whispers and seeing objects move on their own. It'll definitely keep you on your toes if you visit. There's also the Oceanic Hotel, where staff members have a peculiar understanding. The attic may be neglected by the living, but it's a hotspot for the dead. Guests and employees report strange happenings here, such as objects shifting on their own, creaks echoing, and footsteps that vanish upon investigation. Local lore humorously suggests that the droppings found out there are not from mice, but from the playful spirits roaming the attic. Now, this local lore sort of disregards the fact that droppings from mice and rats are frequently found in the attic of this building, and they instead prefer the version of the tale that says that it's playful spirits roaming in the attic. The island's chapel is another site of spectral activity, with reports of ghostly singing drifting from within, sometimes late into the night. And if you're lucky, or maybe perhaps unlucky, you might catch a glimpse of a ghostly black dog that's notorious for vanishing before you can give it a pet. According to the mystique, there's also mysterious lights seen off of the coast that sort of resemble a flaming ship. If you've seen my previous videos, you'll know that I have a soft spot for college campuses, and it turns out the University of New Hampshire has quite the spooky lineup. Let's dive into the ghostly happenings here, starting with Smith Hall. Smith Hall was built in 1908 with a generous $10,000 donation from Miss Hamilton Smith, and this was the university's first dedicated women's dorm. Before that, a farmer's house was converted to a temporary residence on site until it tragically burned down. Talk about a fiery start. Now, Smith Hall is the oldest dorm on campus, and it has a rich history. It was originally meant for women who lived away from home. Sorry guys, no co-ed fun here, and it housed 32 residents for just $1.25 to $2 a week. Today, it's the smallest dorm, and it was turned into a co-ed international hall in 1983, hosting themed lunches that feature cuisine from around the globe, but amid all this fun, there's a bit of a spectral twist. The most famous ghost here in Smith Hall is a beautiful young woman in a flowing white dress, often referred to as the classic woman in white. She's known to open doors, flick lights on and off, and leave behind the eerie sound of footsteps in the attic. Legend has it that she was a resident named Mary who faced some challenges during her time there. While I couldn't find any official records of her tragic tale, it certainly adds to the hall's haunted charm to have the rumor that she passed away inside of it. Legend has it that she was a resident named Mary who faced some challenges during her time here and, well, decided to pass away, if you catch my drift. Next, we have the ominous Wolf House, home to the university's sexual harassment prevention program. And this isn't just any ghost story, it's actually said that an entity resides here, whatever that means. Yes, you heard that right, an entity, which raises the question, are we dealing with a friendly ghost here or something more sinister? Rumor has it that a group of students once summoned whatever this entity is while playing with a Ouija board, and now it enjoys exploring the attic crawl space and making surprise visits to the therapy room. Common occurrences include hearing voices and feeling phantom touches. Perfect for those who enjoy a little supernatural therapy, I guess? I don't know, kind of spooky. There's also Thompson Hall, affectionately known as T Hall. It was built in 1893, and it was and is, I think, the university's main building, sporting a grand clock tower that keeps the time, presumably for the living. Just like the rest of the university, it's located on what was once a farmer's estate, and T Hall has seen its fair share of history. Students and staff report hearing unexplained footsteps here, and even hear voices that seem to respond to questions. One persistent rumor suggests a young woman, who also reportedly met a tragic end, lingers here. And let's not overlook the fact that elevators are supposedly said to go up and down by themselves here. Sure, they might just be malfunctioning, but it wouldn't be fun to just assume that. It would be more fun to think they have a ghostly guide, right? So whether you're a fan of ghost hunting or just enjoy a good story, the University of New Hampshire has enough spectral charm to keep you entertained. Just be sure to bring a buddy if you're venturing into Smith Hall after dark. If you've watched my last few videos, you'll know I'm a sucker for a good meal, and the Windham Restaurant in southeastern New Hampshire has my taste buds tingling. With pumpkin spice cocktails, Moscow mules, ginger duck, and sirloin steak tips. It sounds like my kind of culinary paradise, but hold on to your forks, this place has a history as rich as it's meaningful. Originally a farm in the early 1700s, the Colonial-style home was built in 1812 by the Dinsmore family, and it's had a storied past, including being home to New Hampshire's former governor, who was, I presume, part of this family, named Samuel Dinsmore, who held office from 1931 to 1933. After serving as the Riviera Restaurant, it transformed into the Windham we know today, but not without its ghostly resident. Guests and staff alike have reported some spine-tingling encounters, with the most common experience being a chilling breeze that creeps up the neck, so cold that one waitress felt a draft and then poof, her necklace mysteriously unlatched and fell off onto the ground. It's also said that every morning staff returned to find chairs that were neatly tucked into tables mysteriously scattered about. Also around Christmas one year, they even discovered presents stacked in midair above a staircase. Now, I can think of a million ways to prank your coworkers, but defying gravity? That's next level. Unfortunately, I can't share the photo, but you can look it up online. It's very mysterious. Finally, let's not forget about the wine glasses that apparently have a mind of their own in the building, sliding across tables and shattering on the floor. Some have even been flung against walls. Now, obviously, it's not the wine glasses themselves that are haunted, but it's said that it's the ghosts of the old residents that are taking these glasses and smashing them about, perhaps because they're mad that they can't drink wine anymore. Now, all of this ghostly activity is usually attributed to 3 residents. First up is Jacob. He's a man who took a tumble down the stairs after a heart attack. What a way to go. Then there's little William, a boy that was supposedly struck by a horse-drawn carriage outside of the house and brought into the home for treatment, but tragically he did not make it. Finally, there's a nameless little girl who's known to wander around the house too. Now, one of the funniest ghost stories I've heard involving the home may very well not be a ghost story. It's just told that way by the restaurant, and it involves a guest who put cash into a billfold for the waitress, only for her to discover that $20 had mysteriously vanished or perhaps never been there in the first place. Now, when she asked the guest about this, the guests swore they'd given the correct amount, but it seems they must have had a ghostly accountant on their hands because $20 went missing. These days, the Windham Restaurant embraces its haunted reputation, inviting guests to come for the food and stay for the spirits. And they even bring in a psychic before Halloween every year, because what's better than a good meal followed by a side of supernatural intrigue? I'd personally love to dine here and see if I could catch a glimpse of a ghost myself, so who's in for a hauntingly good meal? Alton, New Hampshire is a quaint little town with about 5,000 residents, best known for being a beautiful spot along the nearby lake. But if you think Alton is just about sunshine and water sports, think again. Nestled in this charming locale is the town hall, built in 1894 for a cool $15,000. It's a classic brick building, complete with a clock tower, because as we all know, if you're haunted, it's practically a legal requirement to have a clock tower. Inside, you'll find an opera stage and an auditorium where the community gathers for meetings and events. But don't get too comfortable. This public building comes with ghostly guests. While the specifics of the haunting are a bit vague, security guards and passerbys have reported the classic hearing disembodied voices chatting away in the hallways late into the night. There are also things that have happened in here that are a little more convincing to me than just the sounds of human voices, which are known to come from humans. Furniture has been known to rearrange itself into strange patterns. For instance, one security guard heard noises and rushed to investigate them, only to find all the furniture in a room lined up like obedient soldiers, just all in a line. Clearly, someone was redecorating that room. There's also been reports of the sounds of children's laughter, often followed by sightings of a young girl in old-timey clothing peeking out of the town hall's windows. Some folks wonder if this individual is just curious about modern life or if she's trying to catch a glimpse of maybe the next unsuspecting visitor for her to haunt. Also, let's not forget that there's a basement in this place, and all basements have to be haunted. Rumor has it that the basement is haunted by the former janitor who sadly passed away while he was at work from a heart attack, and he still lingers down there, keeping the place spick and span from beyond the grave. You might actually catch him moving things around too. It's said that he's actually the one that moves furniture around, and he's probably the one that lined up all of that furniture we talked about earlier. Now, in addition to security guards frequently reporting stuff like footsteps and voices in the building in the dead of night, even notable community figures like the police chief and town planner have stepped forward to share their eerie experiences, and they did this in 1991. If upstanding community individuals like them get spooked by this place, do the rest of us even have a chance? So if you're feeling brave and you want to see these spectral shenanigans for yourself, the town hall is open daily from 8:30 to 4 p.m. And while ghost hunting is probably not officially sanctioned, signing up as a security guard could be your ticket to the job with a little extra thrill. The Amos J. Blake House Museum in Fitzwilliam, New Hampshire is a charming 1837 home that once doubled as a store. Originally, it was owned by the esteemed Amos Blake, a lawyer and community leader, and this house was his law office until he passed away in 1925. After this, it was handed down to his son Leroy, who ran his insurance building from the family abode. But don't be fooled. Leroy might have inherited the house, but he didn't inherit his father's reputation, and he was known as a ladies' man and a hoarder, two things that you don't see combined very often. But yeah, Leroy left behind a cluttered legacy, if you catch my pun. By the time he passed in the 1960s, it was said you could barely navigate the cluttered space without doing some serious obstacle dodging, and in 1966, the Fitzwilliam Historical Society swooped in and transformed the house into a museum that welcomes visitors to this day, and also the occasional ghost hunter, if they play by the rules, of course. Inside, you'll find an eclectic mix of trinkets, desks, toys, and even some vintage medical equipment. It's a treasure trove of history, really. But beware, as with everything else on this list, it's also crawling with ghosts. Reports indicate that there are at least 11 confirmed ghosties residing in this historic home. Although I'm not sure how one goes about confirming a ghost, but regardless, among them is a grumpy old man who has claimed his turf on the nearby stairs. He's just sits there and he's angry about it, according to mediums. He's often accompanied by a spirited lady who apparently loves to dance, according to mediums, and also is known to talk on EVPs. Pretty lively duo. Also, let's not forget the mischievous ghost of a young boy who reportedly has a spectral feline friend. Ghost hunters have supposedly caught whiffs of cat urine before spotting this ghostly cat darting around in the basement, only to vanish like a puff of smoke. Now, enterprising ghost hunters eager to make contact have been known to bring along cat toys and children's toys, which, when left unattended, are said to move around. Unfortunately, there's no footage of this, so maybe the ghosts are just camera shy. Now, if you're feeling brave and you want to explore this place, from Memorial Day to Labor Day, this place offers free tours. And if you want a little more thrill, they also host twilight tours. Kimball Castle in Guilford, New Hampshire is a stunning summer estate that once belonged to Benjamin Ames Kimball, a railroad director with a flair for the grand. Built in 1894, this castle sits atop a hill overlooking a picturesque lake, surrounded by a sprawling 300-acre estate. With its impressive construction by Italian stonemasons using granite and imported European materials side by side. Benjamin enjoyed his splendid home until his passing in 1920, and fast forward to 1960 when the last heir passed away and the land was donated to the Mary Mitchell Humane Foundation. Sadly, the castle fell victim to the whims of time and succumbed to disrepair and vandalism. For a while, it seemed like this beauty might fade into oblivion until the town of Guilford stepped in during the 1980s, taking on the mantle of caretakers. Now, where there's a picturesque castle in the woods, you can bet your butt there's a ghost or two lurking about. Modern-day caretakers report all sorts of spooky shenanigans, from full-bodied apparitions making surprise appearances to the sounds of ghostly horses trotting in the stable. Also, if you're keeping score, yes, that's right, New Hampshire currently has 2 horse-related hauntings. Doors also apparently open and close on their own, and eerie figures make themselves at home in the living room. Ghost hunters have also documented, whatever that means, strange fluctuations in electromagnetic fields and chilling temperature shifts from room to room, as well as the occasional antique clock that seems to start ticking away after years of silence. Rumor has it that the spirit haunting Kimball Castle has even communicated with mediums, although, as we know, those are notoriously unreliable, and it's expressed a desire to be left alone. But sadly, this ghost's wish probably isn't going to be granted, because I read that plans are afoot to transform this castle into a restaurant and event venue for weddings and other gatherings. So, New Hampshire natives, get ready for a brand new haunted dining experience, because nothing says romantic dinner like sharing a meal with a ghost. Welcome to the New Hampshire State Hospital in Concord, a place that's pretty steeped in history and, dare I say, a sprinkle of the supernatural. Established in 1842, this was the 17th mental health facility in the USA and the 7th in New England, and its creation was driven by a wave of philanthropic compassion, or at least maybe a desire to give those who were deemed insane a better place than the cold chambers or jails they were often found in. They snagged 120 acres of land for a cool $9,500, which sounds pretty good honestly to me, and here they set the stage for a therapeutic environment surrounded by nature. Patients here often worked on an on-site farm, making the asylum self-sufficient, and the first building was a grand 4-story structure with some eerie wings. This was the only building for this facility for the first 50 years of its existence, and the wings became notorious for being pretty spooky, because there were only lights at the ends of them, as in, when you were standing in the central area looking down the wings, there was pretty much no light, just one light at the end of the wings acting as a beacon for you to walk down, because when the patients' doors were closed, the only lights that were in their rooms were not beaming out of them. So it was essentially a dark hallway in an insane asylum. Pretty neat. Fast forward to 1989 and the hospital closed its doors to patients, and many of the services it offered were moved to other facilities. Some of the buildings now, after this closing, have been transitioned into office spaces for the state, but most remain abandoned. And of course, where there are office workers diligently sipping coffee and tackling paperwork alongside the less diligent ghosts of the past, there are bound to be some unsettling reports. The most common? Footsteps that echo throughout the halls at all hours that will send a shiver down your spine while you're trying to focus on your daily wordle. I mean your daily reports. And no, that cold breeze isn't your boss sneaking up behind you either. More accounts come from those who hear screams or cries reverberating throughout the building, and some believe these sounds are remnants of the mistreatment faced by former patients. While there's no specific evidence of this, it's a haunting thought, isn't it? Also, let's not forget that the janitorial staff often report sightings of figures in peculiar outfits. Possibly former patients or doctors or maybe nurses gliding through the hallways during their nightly rounds. So whether you're drawn to the eerie history of this place or just curious about the spectral co-workers you might have lurking in the shadows, the New Hampshire State Hospital is a pretty spooky slice of history that still whispers its secrets today. In the woods of Manchester, New Hampshire, stands an old youth detention center, a crumbling brick relic from the early 1900s. You might expect it to be a hotbed of local lore, but oddly enough, it kind of slipped through the cracks of history. If it weren't for some curious Redditors, I might never have even noticed this place, or I might have thought this place was just made up. The building is apparently boarded up tight, barely allowing any light to escape, but crafty local youth have managed to rip the boards off, giving curious people a peek into the shadows within. What they've found is enough to make anyone kind of freak out. There are reports of dim, flickering lights that almost kind of look like lantern light that gently sway in the abandoned halls, and some speculate that these might be the ghosts of mischief makers of the past, still playing hide-and-seek in the dark, or perhaps they're more nefarious characters. Even spookier are the unsettling sounds echoing from the basement, a place that's locked up tighter than a jar of pickles at my family's barbecue. Locals say this basement isn't just locked up to keep out trespassers, though, but rather it's to protect them from what lurks below, if you believe it. So while the history of this place remains a well-kept secret, its mysterious aura certainly draws in the brave-hearted, or perhaps the foolhardy. If you're ever wandering through Manchester's woods, keep your eyes peeled for this haunted hideaway. Who knows what ghostly tales await inside those dark, foreboding walls. In the shadowy corners of Exeter, New Hampshire, where UFOs once stole the spotlight, there lies a unique haunt, the Lindenshire Trailer Park. Now, before you start imagining Jim, Ricky, or Julian setting up shop, let's get to the real story. An urban legend that's a bit more chilling than the Canadian shenanigans we're used to in trailer parks. According to local lore, this trailer park was built on land that used to be a graveyard and left to wither away. Naturally, though, when you plop a trailer park on top of a piece of ghostly real estate, you're bound to attract a few spectral visitors. Residents often report seeing what they think are just folks loitering outside of their trailers, only for these figures to fade away. There's also an infamous incident with a light bulb. I know this sounds pretty mundane, but apparently someone was walking around and spotted a light bulb that was glowing a strange crimson hue and thought, that's a funny light bulb. But upon closer inspection, they discovered it was not just a quirky light bulb, it was rather covered in a thick red liquid that seemed sort of like blood. Now, if that happened to me, I'd probably channel my inner Scooby-Doo and shout, "Zoinks!" and make a beeline back to the mystery machine. But wait, there's a bit more. Adjacent to this park, there's also a wooded area that's dubbed the Hobo Jungle. While I couldn't find anything specific about this place in New Hampshire newspapers or anything, it does seem to fit the classic trope of homeless camps lurking in the woods. And because of this, even though unhomed individuals aren't known to conduct satanic rituals, it's said there are satanic rituals in these woods, as well as restless spirits. And some locals say that if you wander into the woods at night, you might see someone darting between trees, always out of reach and always kind of watching you. So finally, if you happen to Google this trailer park, you might stumble on an article from 2007 that claims this trailer park was sold off to a housing development and the residents were going to be displaced. But panic not, a quick glance at Google Maps shows the trailer park still stands. This means my dreams of living in a trailer park full of playful spirits, reminiscent of a Halloween special of Trailer Park Boys, are very much alive. Nestled south of Manchester, Lichfield has a history that stretches back to the 1600s. Once this area was actually part of Massachusetts until 1749 when it became a proud member of New Hampshire. But among its quaint tales, there's one chilling legend that lurks in the shadows, Darrah's Pond. Now, this pond is not just any old body of water, it's rumored to be haunted by the playful yet haunting spirits of children. One tale, which I'm pretty skeptical of because, let's be honest, it sounds like a plot from a B-movie, it claims that a bus full of children met a tragic end here in the 1900s, and that a bus somehow plummeted into the pond's center, and the authorities just assumed nobody survived, and so they left the bus there with bodies in it and all. I mean, who needs a tow truck when you can just make a cemetery out of your local pond, I guess? Regardless, the pond is big, about 900 by 900 feet, which is probably plenty of room for a bus to float around in its depths, but let's be real, I doubt a bus could wade its way all the way to the center of a pond like this, and I seriously question whether they would just leave a bus behind with a bunch of bodies inside of it, and then whether there would not be a single shred of documentation regarding this occurring in the pond. I'm throwing this in the mythology bucket. More plausible are whispers of a summer camp for boys that once thrived near this very pond in the early 1900s, and legend has it that an unfortunate lad, not quite mastering the art of swimming yet, drowned during a camp outing. And guess what? It's said that he's still trying to make a splash. In warm summer months, if you find yourself wandering the paths surrounding this pond, listen closely, it's said you might just hear a faint cry for help. A chilling echo from the boy that never made it back to shore. Alright, so here's a quick but eerie little tale for you. On the campus of Keene State College stands Huntress Hall, a dorm built in 1926 originally to house female students. It's named after Harriet Lane Huntress, a member of the State Board of Education, and yes, yet another haunted women's dorm. What is going on here, by the way? I'm starting to think there was some sort of old-timey paranoia about educated women. Actually, we know there's old-timey paranoia about educated women. Seriously, what a bunch of doofuses. But anyways, Huntress Hall was pretty ordinary, until the 1940s. That's when World War II pilots, yes, male World War II pilots, started being housed there alongside the female students. Cue the spooky part. During this time, it's said that people started reporting strange noises coming from the attic, like something heavy rolling around. And according to the legend, these noises haven't stopped since. So what's the deal? Well, the story goes that Harriet Huntress herself was not too thrilled about these unmarried men and women living together under the same roof, and allegedly she began furiously rolling around in her old wheelchair, which just so happened to be stored in the attic. Now let's be real, this sounds like a classic urban legend, an easy way to explain some weird attic noises that were probably just, rats. But hey, this wheelchair was up there, so naturally someone connected the dots, and I'm not sure this tale really reflects Harriet's true feelings on co-ed dorm life. I should just throw that out there. Let me introduce you to the famous Madame Sherri, the woman behind the ghostly whispers in the forest that now bear her name. Born in Paris, Madame Sherri moved to New York City in 1911 to pursue a career as a costume designer, and she quickly gained fame as a bit of a party legend, especially during the Roaring Twenties, where she was known for her extravagant flair and lively spirit. Somewhere in the mix, she married her husband Andre, but sadly, tragedy struck in 1917 when he was hit by a vehicle, and his health deteriorated until he passed away in 1924. Madame Sherri was heartbroken, and she sought solace with a friend in Chesterfield, New Hampshire, and she fell head over heels in love with the area. And this led her in 1929 to buy 588 acres of land there, and she got to work building a castle on a new estate that was established in 1931. Now, this wasn't just any castle. No, this was a 3-story, fur-covered, portrait-adorned mansion, complete with a bar. Think Great Gatsby-level elegance, except with more fur. It quickly became a hotspot for Prohibition-era parties, where Madame Sherri would show up in these over-the-top outfits, strutting down her famous staircase like she owned the place because, she did. Of course, you might be thinking, wow, she must have been rich. But she wasn't. All of this was actually funded by her friend and protege, Charles Lemaire, but eventually the checks stopped coming from him, and Madame Sherri's fortune ran dry. Or maybe she was just never rich in the first place. In 1959, a final nail in the coffin occurred when she was away from the home, and vandals damaged the castle, and that pretty much ended her love affair with the place. The castle later burned down, leaving behind nothing but ruins, and today the land has been donated to the Forest Society, and the remains of the once grand castle have become a curious tourist attraction known as the Madame Sherri Forest. And here's the spooky stuff. Despite swearing off the place before her passing, some claim that Madame Sherri never really left. Visitors report seeing her ghost still making those dramatic entrances, dressed in lavish costumes, descending the grand staircase like it's 1925 all over again. And if you're lucky, or maybe unlucky, depending on how you feel about ghosts, on a full moon you might just catch a glimpse of her, wandering through the forest, draped in an opulent bit of attire, and vanishing into the trees as mysteriously as she arrived. Finally, we're headed to the eastern border of New Hampshire to the historic town of Dover. Founded in 1623, Dover is not only the oldest permanent settlement in the state, but also the 7th oldest in the entire USA. So yeah, it's got some serious history, but today we're not diving into Dover's colonial past. We're actually going to look at its mill era in the 1800s, a time when textile manufacturing dominated the city. Dover's mills were a major player in turning raw cotton into finished cloth, but as you might imagine, it wasn't all smooth sailing. These mills were notorious for having harsh working conditions. They were home to some lousy work rules such as late fines on your pay, gender-based pay disparities, and wage cuts, and eventually these tensions led to a round of strikes that sadly didn't go anywhere. Still, these mills carried on and eventually became known as the Cochecho Manufacturing Company. And here's where the tragedy strikes. In January of 1907, a fire broke out on the 4th floor of the mill in the area late in the evening, and the building's sprinkler system, it wasn't working properly, which left the workers in the mill trapped. In a desperate attempt to escape the inferno, many actually jumped from the windows, with some suffering injuries and tragically 4 of them losing their lives in the blaze. After the fire, the mill was rebuilt, but then it was sold in 1909 to Pacific Mills. But as with many businesses, World War I and the Great Depression hit hard, and the mills eventually closed. The textile industry migrated south, leaving Dover's mills behind, as abandoned relics of a brutal career and a tragic past. And now this once bustling factory, well, these days it's an apartment complex. Yep, listed right there on apartments.com, believe it or not. But here's the kicker, it seems like some of those long-departed mill workers didn't actually leave. Late at night, downtown Dover residents have reported seeing strange lights floating around on the 4th floor of the mill. Tenants of the apartment claim to hear disembodied voices, and on particularly eerie nights, even blood-curdling screams can echo through the halls. Some even swear they've heard the unmistakable hum of old textile machinery starting up on its own. Even the building's custodians aren't spared from this. Those working the night shift have shared tales of hearing the buzz and clank of long-abandoned machines coming to life, as if the spirits of the mill workers are clocking in for yet another night shift. But this all doesn't stop yet. The basement of the building also seems to be a hotbed of paranormal activity, despite being sealed off entirely. People walking by have reported seeing figures peering out from the basement windows, catching fleeting glimpses of movement where there should be none. Also, there are voices, strange lights, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched that have all been reported down in the basement area, even though no one has any reason to be down there. So whether you're a tenant trying to enjoy your apartment or just walking through the downtown, keep your eyes and ears open. Those old mills may be long gone, but it seems like some of the workers are still hard at work. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. From ghostly horses to ghastly ghouls in mills, this venture through New Hampshire was pretty unique. Now with all of this out of the way, just a bit of bookkeeping. Number 1, if you had fun here, please consider subscribing, commenting, and even leaving a like. This is a free way to tell YouTube, hey, this guy's alright. Additionally, if you're also a YouTuber and you're thinking about collaborating or just want to connect, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm sort of looking for ways to expand this channel to something more broad, and maybe we can do this together. With all of this being said, whether you just heard some neighing coming from an abandoned barn down the road, or if you found some ectoplasm on your pasta dish in the old Windham Restaurant, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.